We rented a wheelchair, thinking just to give this ankle a break for a week. I ended up not getting out of that chair for 5 years. My name is Jennifer Jairdullo. Hear my story. Well, the childhood is a quick story. It was a small town in Oklahoma and I left. It was a very tiny little town, so I couldn't wait to get out. And I found myself in the clothing industry and maybe 19 or 20 years old. And I just sort of fell into door-to-door sales. Nobody told me that it was a hard way to make a living. It was the 80s. And not long after that, I got into the custom clothing world with my brother. At the time, 40 hit, I was super healthy, married. Life was just really, it was easy. It was really just an easy, fun time. We had closed between Christmas and New Year's, so I'd had some time off. We'd been very busy. And I would come home and my feet hurt. And I thought it was just walking and the cold, and I really didn't think too much about it. But they started tingling, and it sort of felt like when you hit your funny bone. And it just wouldn't stop. And it just kept happening. And it got to where I rolled this ankle, my right ankle, about 6 times. And I was falling, and it was starting to get really painful 24/7. The progression just kept going up my legs, and I just couldn't walk. And a client had given me a crutch, but I noticed that I kept dropping the crutch because my hands were starting to slip, and I couldn't pin fabric very well, and I kept dropping my measuring tape. So we went back to the neurologist and did another round of tests, and he just said, "You'll get better. You'll get better. There's nothing we can do. You'll be fine." We rented a wheelchair, thinking just to give this ankle a break for a week. I ended up not getting out of that chair for 5 years. So we had booked a trip to the Dominican Republic in January before I started feeling bad. It's now July, it's time to go on the trip. And the doctor said, "Great, beach trip should do you wonders. Get in the water, it'll be great." And on the flight down there, I lost the use of my hands completely. They just curled up and wouldn't open. So when we came back, that's when my neurologist said, "You're a head scratcher. I don't know what's wrong with you." So we then started the process of applying to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, because that's the premier diagnostic hospital in the world, from what I understand. And I was diagnosed with a condition called CIDP, and it's a really long name, but it's MS and ALS's ugly cousin, is a great layman's way of saying it. And the tingling I was feeling were my nerves dying. So by the time I was diagnosed, the paralysis was up almost to the middle of my stomach, and it had taken my hands, and it had jumped and taken my left vocal cord. So I couldn't talk or write or dial the phone or hold a pen or dress myself, comb my own hair. Like it was as bad as you can imagine. And we were told there that there's no hope, there's no treatment. They just basically sent me home to die at 40. For 14 months, I lived with no hope and no real answers, or, there wasn't really any further investigation into anything else because the condition's just so rare. And it wasn't until a friend of mine called one day and mentioned a website called clinicaltrials.gov. There was a number for a doctor in Chicago, and I didn't know anything about what I was doing. I just told her that if I had to roll myself in my chair to Chicago, I would do it. Didn't know if it mattered if I lived in Atlanta or not. And she called right back and said, "No, we're recruiting. We'd love to meet you. You've got to come up and be evaluated, and you have to get a lot of pre-testing done." Basically, the doctor takes your immune system completely away. And I lived in isolation for 30 days while my immune system was eradicated. And then when I was at my sickest with no barrier at all, they reinsert your stem cells through a little IV bag And every day since then, I've gotten better. Basically, it's a new immune system. So when I left the hospital, I was the equivalent of a newborn without any childhood vaccinations or allergies or anything that I had lived with prior. It's all brand new. It's been a slog, but it's been a climb up for sure. And I was able to get rid of the wheelchair in January of 15. So I used it just a little shy of 5 years. In the meantime, I was able to walk with different variations of leg braces and a walker and a lot of grit and determination. Probably not very safely at all, but I was determined I was going to walk again. You know, you've got to be your own advocate first and foremost. The doctors are there to suggest, but you know, I was told by 2 world-renowned hospitals I would never get better, and they were both wrong. So you've got to keep fighting, and you've got to find hope. And a lot of times it's in just the smallest thing. Did a finger move today? Or did somebody call? Or did grandma send a note? I mean, it's the tiny little things that you have to just start focusing on and trying to find. And if you can get to 3 things every day that you're grateful for and work your way up to 5. I mean, there were days that I just would say, I'm grateful that I'm still breathing. It's about as base as it gets. But when everything's hard and everything's a struggle, it is a challenge to try to find something that can bring a little joy or a little light. But I think that helps, and just make that your toe hold or your hand hold or somewhere to rest your head. I don't know, if body parts aren't working, it's kind of hard to use those analogies, but I do think that gratitude practice is so important because it just gets your mind focused on what's possible. It may not be today, but it doesn't mean that it won't happen in the future.